Hello and welcome. Thank you all for coming. This is the third part of the series that we have been doing. This one is designing for people with daylight and fresh air. So hopefully you guys have been tracking with us over the last few weeks. And now on to the third part of our storyline. I'm seeing that someone wrote audio is breaking up. I just want to make sure before I start that the audio is okay.
You
Just to make
sound
sure
good on my
everyone can
side,
hear
Monica.
me well. Yeah? Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay. So just as a quick introduction, if maybe you haven't been here in the last couple of weeks, my name is Monica Bulos. I am the architectural project coordinator at Velux. I have been for almost 2 years now. I do have a background in architecture. I graduated Carleton University a couple of years ago um, and loved it. And now I am at Velux and learning a lot about daylight and design. Not a whole lot, like I didn't get a whole lot of that at school, so it was really refreshing. And a lot of what I'm learning, I'm now presenting to architects and designers such as yourselves, hoping to really educate the design and architecture. And I just want to hand it over to Russell just for a little bit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Russell Ibbotson, and I'm the Technical Manager and Commercial Program Manager at Velux Canada. Been with the company almost 10 years, so just over half of my career in the industry. I studied as an engineer and did some design early on. Have been really working with high-performance buildings for a long time. I'm really come in on the energy side, but I'll say when I joined Velux, I became a fan of the daylight design around using the sun. So I'm an architectural fan with an engineering approach to things. So between Monica and I, we can really handle quite a bit of this daylight design side of things. So it's Monica presenting 90% of today. So with that, I will pass you back to Monica.
Yep, I'm here.
Monica,
I'm not sure if the audio is just a little off.
great. I
Okay,
couldn't hear you for a bit,
so
so I can hear you now. So go ahead.
okay. Um, So, if you weren't tracking with us in the last couple of weeks, I just wanted to give the floor to Russell to do a little bit of a recap on what he presented last week, and then we'll jump into this week's topic.
Okay, I should have checked that I was going next as well. I apologize. So last week we presented daylight from above, the technical considerations. And I took this presentation and I broke it into three sections. We looked at energy, so looking at prescriptive path for energy code and performance path for energy code, and some of the bigger considerations around the use of skylights and how to consider things like the U value, the thermal effectiveness of the product, as well as solar heat gain. We took that into the discussion. And then we talked about durability and really the structure, the building code part of things, but also some of the building science around water infiltration and condensation and things like that. I guess I've got slides to support that. And and then the third part of the presentation was about comfort. And in this part of the conversation, we talked about glare and we talked about thermal comfort and acoustics and some elements around Active House, which we're going to expand a little bit around today. Active House being a European high performance building standard that Velux has been involved with internationally. So we really we took a closer look at that. And I at that time, before I went into the comfort section, I asked everybody to take their energy blinders off. And I think with energy code or the building code so focused on energy, sometimes we forget there are other trade-offs when we look at energy efficiency as a standalone. So that was the idea: take the blinders off and try to get that bigger picture around designing with skylights. And that's, if it's hard for anybody, it's going to be hard for me, because that's my background is energy, and that's my, the first 8 or 9 years of my career were focusing on the energy and high performance buildings. So that was the element that we were asking people to do. This presentation is available on YouTube. There's a link for it on the RAIC corporate page. If you scroll down far enough, there is a spot where you can look at past presentations. And with that, I invite Monica to take up the floor.
And actually, that's a really great segue into this presentation. In the first presentation, we talked about daylighting strategies and all the different ways we can bring daylight into our buildings from above. Then the second presentation was all about the technical aspects. And I love that last slide of the energy blinders, taking that off and seeing design and architecture as a bigger picture, and it's more than just energy efficiency. So going into that, Winston Churchill had famously said that we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. And this is an image by Adolf Bayer, which expresses really well Le Corbusier's vision for cities of light and air. And I first saw this in university in one of my architecture courses. And it really struck me, and I think it expresses this idea really well. And Le Corbusier says that the sun is the master of life. Society will no longer tolerate a situation where entire families are cut off from the sun and thus doomed to declining health. And Renzo Piano, another really famous architect who loved using daylight in his design, really understood the importance of daylight and understands that light is probably the most essential material for architecture. It is the least touchable, but probably the most important. And it really is certain that our bodies and minds need the sun. Humankind has always had an innate connection to the sun and has relied on its resources for health and flourishing. The sun is the central entity for sustenance on a biological and emotional level. And light from the sun is fundamentally unique in that it has the highest light and spectral variations needed to support biological functions. And artificial light is simply not a good enough substitute for daylight. So shown here is the intensity of light by wavelength for natural light compared to typical artificial light sources. And you see that no artificial light sources are able to mimic daylight's variations in the light spectrum. And also note that only 40% of daylight is visible radiation, while the remaining is infrared and ultraviolet wavelengths. We need the sun for more than just seeing. The sun's radiation affects our bodies, our minds, our emotional health, and our behavior. The sun's nutrients influence countless factors of the human physiology and behavior, which are governed by the circadian rhythm. So that's our 24-hour biological clock. We're genetically bound to these natural rhythms of daylight to guide our body and cellular growth, the secretion of hormones. We need the variations to stimulate the body's biological master clock on a cellular level even. It promotes the processing of proteins. The non-visual input of daylight is also needed to synthesize vitamin D into calcium. And even more, it regulates melatonin, which is related to sleep, and cortisol, which is related to stress. So I threw out a whole bunch of things that the sun does. And this really shows that ultimately daylight makes sure that our bodies are well maintained and balanced from day to day. And there have been several studies that have found daylight to improve many, many things, such as the learning and information retention in children. You see that it helps with patient relief and recovery. And you can even see that it helps with productivity in workplaces. So you really are starting to understand that daylight is one of the greatest tools that an architect has when it comes to improving the lives of people and their health and well-being. And there are even more general studies that have shown connections between daylight levels and improvements in children's learning and test scores. There are higher scores in math and reading, fewer sick and absent days from school compared to those that are in inadequately daylit classes. There's better concentration, improved vision, better memory retention. Working in classrooms without daylight really does disrupt the basic hormone patterns that really helps us function well. And we also see the importance in healthcare settings. After food, lighting is the most important environmental input in controlling bodily function. It really affects the body on a hormonal and metabolic rate. And there have been even more studies that have shown the major contributor and shortage of experienced nurses, and that there isn't enough daylight. It increases their stress. But introducing nurses and doctors to at least 3 hours of daylight per day, you're actually reducing their stress and increasing their satisfaction at work. You see that there's also less medical errors found, and there's just an overall positive influence on the health and well-being due to increased visibility, improvement to the circadian rhythm, and psychological effects such as the alleviation of seasonal depression. And the World Green Building Council summarized even more of the benefits here. So if we know that daylight has all of these benefits, how do we get more of it into our buildings? And that's really what we touched on in that first presentation. You know, we're starting to see now beyond the strategies and the importance of daylight. Daylight is super unique because daylight is never normal. You have variations in lighting. The daylight will move and change as the sun moves across the sky. There will be changes throughout the day, the month, the year. There'll be changes in the intensity, location, the color of the light. Sky conditions and clouds moving will disperse daylight differently and cause it to change. And it really enhances psychological comfort. And humans are really drawn naturally to daylight. And we learned that daylight is most powerful from above, that roof windows and skylights have shown to provide up to 2 to 3 times more daylight than facade windows. And I had mentioned that rule of thumb that we really like to use: the more sky you see, the more daylight you get. And we have to remember, the sun is an extremely dynamic light source, so you have this diversity of daylight. You can have direct daylight, indirect, or reflected. And we touched on how there are many factors that affect daylight coming into a building. You have your sky conditions, your location, your surroundings, if there's any obstruction, orientation, all of these things. And the question that this raises is, how are you going to design your spaces to overcome these challenges now in light of understanding the importance of daylight for people? There's also this element of view and surroundings, and sometimes it really is about what our eyes are seeing as well. Looking outside really does change the inside. You know, you have this doorway to the sky and the surrounding landscape, and it's going to provide you this abundance of daylight. It's going to give you this connection to nature and this feeling of spaciousness. Even the idea of biophilic design is now coming into play, and understanding that innate connection we have with the outdoors. Your exterior views can absolutely transform the essence and expression of the interior of your space. You have, again, this doorway to the sky. It's going to provide you views to outside, and having both views to the surrounding landscape and the sky is really important. Both are really necessary for the psychological and visual comfort. You're having a view with layers. You're having layers of sky and city and landscape and the ground. You're having this visual variation. And that's really going to help expand that visual experience. It's going to make the space feel bigger and brighter. You're going to experience less eye fatigue because the light is going to be more balanced, when coming from multiple sources. And ultimately, you're going to enjoy the space more. Now, another important part of the conversation of healthy buildings is indoor air quality and natural ventilation. But why is it so important? So, indoor air has been shown to be up to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. We've become a society that spends 90% of our time indoors. Buildings are more airtight than they've ever been, which is good. It's good at keeping things in, so it's a blessing. You have energy savings, you're keeping heat inside your building, but it can also be a curse in the sense that now we're trapped with all of this pollutant and harmful air within our buildings. And this contributes to sick building syndrome that increases our vulnerability to sickness. We're now experiencing symptoms such as headaches, irritation with our eyes, nose, and throat, dry cough, itchy skin, fatigue, difficulty concentrating. We're now reducing a sense of mental capacity and performance. And the lack of frequent air exchanges has contributed to the rise of allergies, asthma, and eczema. Have I overwhelmed you yet? Because I definitely overwhelmed myself learning about all of this information. And what's really astounding is that we breathe 15 kilograms of air per day. So if we care so much about the food that we are putting in our bodies, shouldn't we care all the more the air that we are breathing into our bodies? Indoor air quality really is affected by chemical pollutants that are found in building materials, such as insulation and paint. You have your volatile organic compounds or your VOCs, and other outdoor sources such as pollen and vehicle pollution. And you're seeing even more things that are found even just in your house, just things that we buy and things that are in our house that we use, even our daily human activities. All of these things are collecting together and creating a really unhealthy indoor climate. And often we can't even detect it. And all of this contributes to occupants' symptoms of illness, discomfort, fatigue, and lack of concentration that appears to be linked to time spent in a building. This slide was actually taken from a presentation from Sandra Tedesco, who presented at the Active House Symposium. I know that we had mentioned that in one of our earlier presentations that we hosted last September. And these stats really struck me. And who would have thought that burning one scented candle in a home is roughly equivalent to moving every major industrial point source and coal-fired power plant in Texas within 50 miles of your home? Like, you read that, and the weight of responsibility as an architect, I think, really comes more into life, more to play. We understand now that indoor air quality is extremely important when designing spaces that people will essentially spend most of their lives in. So how is health and well-being going to be the driver of our buildings? At Velux, we believe that both daylight and fresh air are key elements to healthy buildings. And one consideration is the Active House standard. And if you are not familiar with Active House, it looks at 3 main thresholds: comfort, energy, and environment, with a real focus on occupant comfort. So some of the programs and standards that you are familiar with around built energy, some of them may miss this element of comfort. But with Active House, comfort is the primary design driver. And Active House was really born out of a need to prove that you can have proper amounts of natural light and fresh air and still build an energy efficient home. So some of the projects we are going to look at in the next portion of this presentation actually follow the Active House principles, and some are Active House certified. So even the ones that are not, you really do sense a common thread of importance of human well-being that is connected with a healthy indoor climate with key elements of daylight and fresh air. So for the first section, Liv, Russell's actually going to take this one and I will be back for the rest of the case.
Thank you, Monica. So the first project we're going to look at is a Canadian example, and it's a residential home. This is Active House Centennial Park. This was designed by Andre Delia of Supercool, and the builder was Great Golf. And I was lucky enough to get to live with my family in this house for 6 months back in 2016. I was involved with the design and support of the project, and then I was invited to live in it as a test family. And as a test family, we monitored things like daylight and fresh air. And I verified a lot of the computer modeling that we carried out as we went through the design iteration of the project. So the floor plan of the house, there will be a couple of photos that give you an idea, but if you look, we've got first the basement and then the second floor, and the second floor, the ground floor, you can see there's this opening on the side. So this was this like side courtyard, and it had this tree, which you'll see in the images coming up, this river birch tree that was visible from nearly everywhere in the house, and it really became this centerpiece of design. It provided some greenery in a new development. It provided the the motions. You got to see the daylight from all the skylights in the house, but you got to see the wind blowing through this tree. And then you'll also see that when you walked in, the stairs are hidden. So you had this clear shot view when you walked in the front door, straight through the house through a window. So even though this house was built in Etobicoke, a community as part of Toronto, it was extremely well designed to curate the views. So when you were in the house, you often didn't notice that you were in a small community. Daylight analysis were done on the house. So in the bedrooms and the transportation corridors and spaces like the living room and the dining room, modeling was done. And then on an overcast day, I ran around with my lux meter and took measurements, and ran outside and took measurements, and I was able to validate this model to show that it does have very good daylighting. We monitored the indoor air quality. So we only monitored the CO2. We measured the humidity and temperature as well, but CO2 is a good indicator of indoor air quality. It's one of the main indicators used in the industry. And typically we set thresholds around 1,000 parts per million. That's what that ppm is. And this house, it did have an ERV, and it did have venting skylights. So on the left is a bit of a marketing demonstration of the 6 months and how often we exceeded the CO2 thresholds, kind of the high level. On the right is an image where we showed that the levels were getting quite high in the house, and at that point where the chart drops down back below the 800 threshold, that was because we opened up a skylight. And then we left that skylight open to do what the Europeans call an airing. This is something that we do quite a bit in Europe. We're not as culturally used to doing that, but systems that Velux and other companies have do allow you to operate your windows in sync with your mechanical ventilation. So looking into the house, this was one of the main spaces, the living room area. It was double height with this bridge sort of feature to enter the master bedroom at the back. I'm getting signs that I have no audio. Everything is unmuted on my side. Monica, are you hearing me? I see in the chat there's no audio. I apologize if some people can hear me. Breaking up a bit. Okay, so some people can hear. I'm going to proceed, and it's not a very long section. I apologize for those who aren't hearing me well. Perhaps my internet is breaking up. Okay, let's move forward. This is that same space, and if you look through those tall windows, you can see that river birch tree I spoke of. And like I said, on the ground floor and the upper floor, you could see that tree just about from every room. There's the tree there, and there's that space. Okay, I'm not sure why that image isn't arriving. Okay, the master suite even had some skylights, and I joke often that this space, I gave a 20-minute lighting lecture to my sales team from across Canada, and we played around. We closed the blinds on the skylights, we closed the lights and opened the lights, and we closed and opened the blind, and we compared the light from above, from the side window, and from the electric lighting to look at the color, to see the spread of the light, the evenness of the light. It was probably one of the most effective daylighting presentations I've given, and it was in what ended up becoming my bathroom. Image is not loading on my side. I'm just going to click forward. Oh, there's, I guess, some animations. I apologize. These are two of the bedrooms. So the bedroom on the left is was one of the kids' bedrooms, and my second daughter, Eleanor, she went in this room when we first went to visit the house, and she laid on the bed, and she looked up at those skylights, and she told me it's better to watch the clouds laying down. And she was 4 years old at the time. This is just over 3 years ago. And I know that Super Cool has that written on a little post-it note. A couple of the people in the office have that in their office. So it's pretty neat. You know, from the mouth of babes, you know, she really captured it. And she's also the one in our family that said it's like living outside, living in this house. So it was a really nice experience. And the last slide I'm going to speak to is the radar. So this is an active house presentation. This is how they show you. This one was done to version 2 of the standard, and it's giving you 9 parameters, 3 per each category, so 3 in the comfort, the energy, and the environment. And in comfort, and at this time, we were looking at daylight, thermal environment, and indoor air quality. We have since added acoustics, another important element to comfort. So Active House has a big focus on the comfort element because we have other programs in Canada that do a very good job in energy and environment and around the world. So there's a small group of us working to adapt the energy or the Active House standard to be aligned with North American standards. So using things like ASHRAE 55 for thermal comfort or ASHRAE 62 for indoor air quality. And we're doing this with consultation of a few friends. And one thing I'll end on a quote from one of those friends who's an ASHRAE 55 expert, my friend Robert Bean. He always says, design buildings for people and good buildings will follow. So with that, I'll ask Monica to pick up and continue the presentation. Thank you. And I apologize to those who had some difficulties with my audio.
Thank you, Russell. I really do actually like that last point with Robert Bean. Design for people and good buildings will follow. So hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm going to push through, and hopefully if you are having any issues with audio, you can resolve it. So we looked at live, and now we're on to learn. So some of these projects have names that will be very difficult for me to pronounce, so I apologize right off the bat. So this is the Wolfert Primary School. So this is a primary school and nursery in Austria. And this began with a project competition in 2015 that was settled by the municipality. This architecture firm, which is also very difficult for me to pronounce, got the first prize and was fully realized in 2018. So the rural market town of Wolfert wanted to enlarge their primary school and integrate a kindergarten and a daycare center. And they decided to preserve the old 1960s building, but demolish the 1990s building, part to structural reasons. So the gym on the lower floor was built over and now stands a 27-meter high timber frame volume with a pergola at each end. So the architect describes the design as the school as a path and square. It is a compact form of sustainable timber construction with fluid transitions and pathways that are really inviting children, staff, and parents to enjoy the surrounding context of greenery in the village. The floor plan interlocks vertically and horizontally to reduce as much as possible the walls and barriers. And the school was really designed as a spatial continuum, as the architect would put it, that carefully orchestrates these intimate places of quiet and retreat and courtyards that allowed for greater socialization and interaction. So it was really important that the design created an open learning environment. The plan incorporates many diverse functions. So you have the kindergarten, the primary, the gym, the event venue, and each has clearly defined spaces that interact with each other through barriers of glazing rather than solid or opaque walls. You have these communal areas that are generated as required within each zone, and you actually are getting rid of these unnecessary hallways and corridors. So essentially reducing spaces in the floor plan that were primarily meant for circulation allows for every space to be functional and foster more meaningful interaction and communication. The architects really wanted to cultivate a cozy and warm atmosphere that integrated local craft and materials. So not only in the timber construction of the structure of the main building, but also using oak for floors and furniture, using wood ceiling for acoustics, and creating a healthy indoor environment. And a huge element to cultivating such an open and welcoming environment was having daylight flood the school grounds on every level. So the design is quite generous with the skylights and glazing. They utilize north lights, which are skylights positioned to the north, and that's going to reduce glare. The skylights are allowing light to enter from both directions of the light shaft, which is going to give a really nice and even light in the space, opposed to having a harsh light that is coming from one direction that will increase your perception of contrast, right? We're starting to bring some of these principles that we learned in the first presentation and understanding how it applies to us on a human level here. So we even see that the light shafts are really spacious and open, and they're designed to reduce shadow and contrast and act as a well of light that softly illuminates each space below. There's also these central atriums and courtyards that serve two really main purposes. So the first is daylight. You're really creating opportunities for light to penetrate into the central and core parts of the plan. So they allowed for borrowing daylight between the spaces. They're grabbing daylight from as many directions as possible. And this is especially going to help with spaces on the lower levels, which are farther from the skylights, and spaces that are more in the core that are farther from facade windows as well. And the other purpose is to really create this sense of community. They're encouraging community and interaction between each of the programmatic areas of the space. So you're getting to see what others are doing. And it creates a really playful and open environment. And it's really perfect for little ones that are learning and exploring and really wanting to socialize with other children. The overarching driver for the design of the school was to design a space that was healthy and would foster a learning environment that would allow for better concentration. And we mentioned this earlier, that there are studies that show the connection between daylight and productivity and better concentration and even learning and memory retention, especially in children. And another really important part was to make sure that the children felt as comfortable as possible. And daylight was a massive part of this. And in turn, having more daylight in the space and having to use strategies to bring in more daylight actually advanced the architectural concept to foster community and interaction between the more intimate classroom spaces as well as the more interactive spaces such as the atrium. And all of this was done in such a beautiful way. When you look at this project, you really do sense a really beautiful piece of architecture. Work. So something we can all feel, and especially now in this time, our work spaces are looking a little different than they might have been in the past. But hopefully we are going to return soon and have a better understanding, hopefully, of daylight and fresh air and how that relates to our working. So this is a pretty neat project. This is actually the Velux China office, the headquarters. And this was designed with the Velux AS design team that was led by Enrique Norlander Smith. And this is really to be the new headquarters for the Velux China office in Langfang, which was designed to introduce a new model of healthy buildings. So today's architects should be able to successfully integrate sustainable design practices into their own practice. However, it's not enough to resolve issues just related to thermal comfort and energy reduction. The physical and mental well-being of employees can't be separated from their work environments. So after investing a lot of research to leverage daylight and fresh air as key drivers of improved occupant quality of life, this building was introduced as a new paradigm for healthy, holistic architectural design. So this is also an active house. They were really following these principles in hopes to usher in a new era of office buildings that are thoughtfully designed to promote productivity, motivation, and pride in your workplace, and especially health and well-being for the body and the mind, all the while being in the midst of a busy and competitive work environment. So that is definitely a challenge. So in addition to thermal comfort and low energy applications, the design strategies included natural full spectrum daylighting and clean, fresh air. So the designers of Velux AS Building Industry Division saw a really great opportunity to create a new headquarters that would optimize comfort and productivity of its management, marketing, sales, and technical staff. So each department had its own needs in regards to daylight, acoustic, privacy, and electrical for certain equipment. And there were about 10 departments that they had to oversee in this design. So a really well-informed design required the collaborative process that included various consultants and stakeholders to really yield super detailed studies on energy use, airflow, and task-appropriate daylight factors. So the input of multiple disciplines was really necessary to develop a comfortable workplace that requires minimal energy use. So the way they described it was understanding how the human organism works. You need the collaboration of many parts to create a good indoor climate and make sure that everything is balanced and well regulated. So the plan is showing the recreational activities and fitness center on the ground floor. So even that idea is pretty cool that they have a fitness center and recreation in their office building. And then you see the working spaces and offices on the top floor. So it's an elegant rectangular plan with a 2-story height atrium that runs across the length in the center. And this space accommodates for about 50 employees. So on the right, we're seeing that daylight factor. And hopefully if you were pacing with us in our first presentation, we did talk about daylight factor, and that it's the percentage of daylight inside compared to outside. And we're starting to see again that percentage in those colors. And I had also mentioned in that first presentation this idea of task appropriate lighting. So not every task is going to require the same amount of daylight. So for non-reading tasks on the ground floor, 2% is sufficient and considered well daylit. So that works really well with the program, and that it's a fitness center, recreational space. And then on the second floor, it's showing much higher daylight factor. So virtually the whole floor is sufficiently daylit and accommodates well for the work and tasks needed without having to turn on artificial light. And visitors are immediately impressed by the amount of natural daylight that comes in through the arrays of roof windows and skylights. You have these sloped white walls that dramatically increase the reflection of light in the interior, and that's going to help diminish the need for artificial light. The compact mass is centered around an open double height atrium, and the trapezoidal volume is a much more dynamic volume and appearance, and this also allows for better inflow of light through the roof windows. It is also going to help the effectiveness of the operable skylights on the flat roof that are programmed to open and close at certain times to optimize indoor air quality and temperature. And this is really going to help keep the space cool in the hot and humid summer months. So you can start to see how energy efficiency is coming into play, and you're even starting to read some of those stats that are presented in the center. And the building is continuing to provide more and more insight as it is being measured and continually modified for greater energy efficiency. And there are many challenges to design such a collaborative building system. Langfang climate is cold and dry, and it's a tough climate to achieve low energy consumption. And this building being an office space means that internal heat gain plays a major role in defining the heating and cooling loads. So it's really important to the occupants' comfort in this particular project is TAB, so your thermal active building system. And this was designed to deliver radiant heating and cooling. You have this embedded network of water pipes and mid-plane of all the concrete slabs. And it works in conjunction with the operable skylights to encourage stack effect and natural ventilation. And all of this in turn requires a smaller air handling unit to achieve optimal human comfort. And there were many other decisions as well that were made to enhance the overall healthy and sustainable design strategies. So steps were taken to choose really sustainable materials that would help improve acoustics and minimize VOCs and improve indoor air quality. And then you have sub-metering to accurately monitor energy use and consumption. You have CO2-based control systems that responds based on the feedback it is given. And you have solar heat gain through the windows and skylights in winter. And then you also have exterior and interior shading devices that are going to help minimize the solar heat gain in the summer, as well as control glare and offer soft and diffuse light. So in the age of globalization and expanding construction market in China, this dynamic economic environment meant that Velux had to give extra attention to the well-being of its Chinese employees to sustain innovation and competitiveness. And they really wanted to foster a sense of camaraderie and belonging amongst the staff. So they have the fitness center, they have indoor games such as table tennis, they organize outdoor recreational activities and sports, and most significantly, they have the vegetable garden, which they call the Happy Farm. And the CEO, Christian Olsen, mentioned that many of the employees would finish their lunch really quickly and then spend the rest of their break tending the gardens and collecting the week's harvest every Friday of produce. Some examples are corn and potatoes. And they really understood that the social dimensions is also really important to increase enthusiasm in the job. So coming back to this idea of holistic design and really designing for people. And the overall project is kind of created like a campus-like atmosphere where the manufacturing facility is located about 20 meters from the office building. So they're making sure that even proximity is ensuring community connectiveness. And there was a great challenge to create a Nordic indoor environment and design in China, considering the materials and craftsmanship available. But more than anything, the greatest challenge was shifting attitudes and mindsets in regards to a healthy indoor environment. And employees have now firsthand been able to see the effects of a thoughtfully designed building with health and well-being as the driver, and how it has boosted their personal productivity, and they've experienced less sick days, improved mood, and overall greater satisfaction with their workplace. And now that the employees have experienced it for themselves in their own office, the building now acts as a platform for education to visitors, architects, dealers, on the importance of daylight and fresh air for a healthy indoor climate. And to also educate them on the idea that it doesn't have to conflict with energy efficiency demands. So what surprised people is how they've been able to achieve such low energy consumption while still having 296 roof windows in the building. And the CEO of Velux China, so Christian Olsen, mentions that this is the message they're really trying to convey, and us as Velux, what we're really trying to convey is that windows are important because they are essential in providing a healthy indoor climate. Heal. So I had mentioned earlier on the importance of daylight and fresh air in healthcare sectors. So this is the DZNE, German Center for Neurodegenerative Diseases. This is in Germany, and the architect is Wolfert. So this project was completed in 2016. Here, a team of scientists work on developing treatments for brain disorders such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And the intention for the design of the building was to reflect the groundbreaking research and provide a healthy indoor climate for the employees working, as well as the patients that are receiving treatments on site. So altogether, the project would have approximately 16,000 meters squared of usable floor area and house about 500 employees and visiting researchers. So when the architect firm won the tender, they prioritized creating an inspirational design that would excel architecturally and professionally. So they wanted to ensure bright and communal spaces while respecting the natural surroundings where the project sits in the middle of a pine forest. The design is based on a clear division of spatial program into 3 freestanding buildings that are connected almost like hinges to create meeting points. And the 3 buildings would together form an ensemble that really resembles biological cell structures and would thus establish a new identity on the Venusberg campus. So the 3 buildings each have their own purpose, function, and program. So the first building is the entrance building, and that's going to have all of the general facilities and administration. This is going to include the auditorium, a cafeteria, and a library. The second building is the clinical research department. So your central research building with all of the laboratory facilities and offices. And then the third building is the preclinical institute. And the organization of the buildings is meant to minimize disruption to the surrounding landscape and soaring trees. So you're providing a natural backdrop that is playing a really integral role in the building. The external sun screening of the building displays an interchanging array of shades of red, orange, yellow, and green, which recreate this essence of color and mood in the changing seasons. The site's natural elements are also reflected not only on the exterior facade, but also in the interior. So even though workspaces may be up to even 17 meters away from the facade or facade windows, the essence of the forest is still captured in the openness of the plan and the interior materials and colors. Stephen Vogt, who is the managing partner at Wolfert, says that light is one of the main tools of an architect, It's one of the things that makes the difference between an idea and a piece of architecture. And you see that sentiment displayed really well in the design of this project. The first thing you notice when you enter the building is the abundance of daylight. The entrance hall is characterized by two main elements. You have this futuristic underlit staircase that expands the 5-story building, and over top is this tall atrium with a glass roof. So you're getting an abundance of daylight in the space. And the laboratory building also features an incredible oval-shaped glass opening over the central atrium. And this expresses itself really as a signature feature of the building. So the skylights have very visual noise. This is our Velux Modular Skylights, which we will be talking about in the next presentation next week. And this is really enhancing the concept of reflecting and emphasizing the natural surroundings. So it is providing daylight to the lower levels as well as fresh air and active cooling through the venting units. And all in all, the result is this inspiring design that floods the building with daylight and fresh air and makes the individual workspaces as well as communal areas enjoyable, beautiful, and refreshing to both employees and patients. And the last project, thought we could take a little route to explore and have a little fun with this project. So this is the Grain Solution House by 3XN, and this is in Copenhagen, Denmark. So this is an experimental hotel and conference center. It is a certified active house that the Velux team in Denmark was a part of and collaborated a lot on this project. So located on the Danish island of Bornholm, a popular travel destination, they really had a clear vision of becoming one of Europe's most ambitious communities within sustainable living. So the Green Solution House is a really key element to make this vision a reality. It was designed and developed according to the cradle-to-cradle principle. So all materials used in the building are either fully recyclable or biodegradable. And in a world where the construction industry is responsible for 30% of all waste generated, the Green Solution House really takes on this ambition to eliminate the concept of waste. So for this concept to work, everything has to work in circulation. So this project has 4 overarching goals. First, to be a platform for the highest level of sustainable development. Second, to be an example of continuous improvement. Third, to show solutions on biodiversity, materials, energy, water, and waste. And lastly, to grow a local and global network for knowledge sharing. So they don't want to just reduce harm. They actually want to be a restorative force in the community and environment through their architecture. So looking at the plan, the hotel rooms are situated towards the northwest in the site plan and office buildings towards the southeast, and then opposite end of the main entrance in the conference rooms and eating areas that look out into the surrounding landscape. So of course there was a strong focus on daylight-driven design, and that was key to help create really well-lit spaces in the entirety of the building. So parts of the roof are retrofitted with lightweight steel structure and glass panels that allow daylight to penetrate deep into the space. Sun tunnels are used to bring light in every area where daylight is limited, and skylights are used in all the common areas and hallways. So I had mentioned that we were using the Velux Modular Skylights in that previous project, and it's also being used here. So the ridge light atrium system is actually what informs the form of the roof over most of the building plan, which really gives the building its distinct appearance. They have integrated PV panels. If you look closely, you're able to see it on the right hand, and that creates a really interesting daylight pattern inside. And of course are used primarily for the energy and sustainable features in the building. So comfort was absolutely an important concept of this project, as it is one of the major three thresholds of the active house principle. Daylight, of course, was extremely important to contribute to the comfort of occupants in the space for workers and visitors. So thermal balance or thermal comfort really ensured that the occupants always had a satisfactory indoor temperature, and clean air, of course, was also essential to optimize the quality of the indoor environment. And material choice was another important element to make sure that there was good occupant comfort and health. So carpets on the floor would absorb dust particles, plasterboard on walls would take care of formaldehyde, the roof membrane captures and neutralizes pollution from traffic, and then the screen wall that you see in this image naturally purifies air with plants and balances humidity levels. And achieving optimal thermal comfort, even by balancing natural ventilation, mechanical ventilation, and heating strategies. So diffuse ventilation strategy supplies fresh air through the permeable acoustic panels in the conference center, as well as the restaurant ceiling, which also acts as radiative cooling. And in-floor heating and cooling also supported by on-site thermal energy storage systems. So the desire for buildings to inform and influence behavior was also a really important element in this project. So they designed these smart rooms. They used this app that was developed so that people can learn how to control their indoor environment for themselves. So it would measure energy, light, air, and water, and it really makes it personal for the guests. You're now able to relate your experience in the hotel room with the quality of air and daylight levels. And the hope is that the guests would take these learning principles and apply it into their own home. So we touched on comfort, which was one of the three thresholds of the active house concept. And then the other two were energy and environment. And energy has been measured throughout occupancy. And there's this interactive energy visualization in the lobby that tracks these energy footprints and correlates it to the carbon and resource impact. So they really did a lot to ensure that they were making ethical choices, and that was a big part of the vision, and really enhances the active house concept as well. So wanted to end with this quick recap, because there's a lot of information that was shared, but want to make sure that you take home some really important elements from the presentation. So first is that daylight is unique in its light spectrum, not just for seeing, but being supported on a biological, mental, and emotional level. Artificial light is not a good enough substitute. Indoor air quality is affected by multiple factors and often found to be up to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. Natural ventilation is a simple solution to ensure good indoor quality. And a healthy indoor climate that benefits humans' well-being is achievable while still maintaining strong sustainability and energy practices, which means that you can do it too. And wanted to just close with this quote from Charles Dickens that I discovered a little while back: "The bright sun that brings back not light alone, but new life and hope and freshness." So next week is the Velux product residential and commercial presentation. I think this presentation was actually a really good plug for next week's. All of the case studies that were presented were using Velux product, so you can come and learn the different product offerings and best practices for our skylights. And this is a really great way to take all of the principles that we learned in the last few weeks and apply it by seeing the practical ways that you can make it as a reality, your vision of your health buildings. So that concludes this presentation. If anyone has any questions, I think I'm starting to see a couple in the chat. In your office building, so I think if you are referring to, I mean, there was a wide variety of product that was used and in different ways. So if I
I
am
think I can
thinking
probably touch on
correctly,
that one.
you are thinking of that image I showed with the sloping walls.
Yeah, they were using Velux
I think.
product on the vertical,
Um,
well, the sloped walls, but the exterior walls they're using Velux.
mhm. And I think part of the sloping of um, just the overall volume and form was also helping to reflect daylight in the interior. And then you kind of come back to some of those daylighting strategies that we discussed earlier in that first presentation of ways to reflect light into the space and effectively to kind of reduce glare or reduce this perception of contrast. So I think a lot of that came into play also considering that. We can get access to previous webinars. So I believe that they are on YouTube through the RAIC platform on YouTube. I did see mine. I
Yes,
didn't
on
watch
the
it because I
Monica,
thought it
can
would
you
be
hear me?
weird. I can hear you. You're a little quiet, but I can hear
Okay,
you.
so I apologize. The previous webinars are on the RAIC corporate page. So raic.org/corporate. If you scroll down, there's a link to them that will bring you to the YouTube page. You may also be able to find previous presentations through the RAIC channel on YouTube. And if they're not available, or if you don't see them there, if you email us, we'll let you know.
Yes, that is exactly right. Thank you. And I see there's still a few more people typing questions.
Seeing lots of compliments. So, yeah, if you enjoyed it,
Yeah.
come back for next week. Oh, what is the max CO2 threshold?
Yeah. I can address that one.
Russell, I think this is a question for you.
Yes. So, with regards to CO2, it's an indication of air quality, and we didn't get into the details of this, but there's cognitive research done probably most famously with Dr. Allen at Harvard University, where they correlated high levels of CO2 with risk aversion, with being less conclusive in making decisions, less ability to focus. I can attest after carrying around a CO2 meter into every boardroom I went into for about a year, in hotel rooms, and having monitors in my house now for almost 4 years, that I actually feel tired if it gets above 1,000 or 1,200 parts per million. I start to fade out. I'm not, when you're in a small office and you're meeting with a group of people, I'm the first one that kind of does the hammer the nails thing. I get the head nod or drop my pen. So I'm susceptible to that. But there is some studies that show that as well. At more elevated areas, there's comfort or there's health concerns. But we're really looking at capacity of learning. There's some studies that look at student learning, and that having that fresh air does allow them to focus and retain information better. So there is a comfort element because you're more alert, and you're but there's also a cognitive advantage of being able to think better and learn better. The sorry, I got to scroll up to get the right question. The main
Well,
differences
there.
between active house and passive house, I think, is the next question. The Active House has elements for energy, environment, and comfort. And Passive House really focuses in on the energy part. And I love Passive House. I think it's fantastic. If you're going to look at wall assemblies and get deep into the weeds on how to get extremely good, airtight, thermally efficient envelopes, Passive House is amazing. Now, when you look at Active House does look at the energy, and if you built a passive house, you'd get the best score on energy because they reign well at that. They're fantastic. But the indoor air quality, taking a bigger approach, not just say put mechanical ventilation in, but really do some modeling and get an understanding of the air quality in the space. I think that's something that is more in line with what WELL standard and some of these do. But it's packaged, and then environmentally, the active house, for us North American people, it probably better aligns with the LEED. LEED is probably the one that is superior in the environmental consideration with regards to material and site. So this active house brings a lot of those together. And in Europe as well as in North America, though, it's that comfort element, short of WELL, and Active House has been around for more than a decade, short of WELL and some of these other programs and FitWell and things. When the Active House came out, there was a void in the market around that comfort part of it. I'll jump on the next question because it looks like I can address it as well. The house that we were the test family in for 6 months, by Great Golf Homes. So it was sort of a prototype. That was the second house that the builder and architect team had done. There is a third one that is being built right now. And I say prototype doesn't sound right. It's like iterations of getting towards a product that they can mass produce. Great Golf does in North America, they do a couple thousand houses because they're Ashton Woods in the US and they're Great Golf in Canada. They do high rise as well and commercial, but in their part 9 or low rise residential, they do hundreds of houses in Canada. And for them, it's an iterative process. They've got a couple on the drawing board with the intent of having them rolled out as an upgrade option within their community. And Great Golf has been a champion at the international level as well in looking at Active House and promoting it. And it was in collaboration with Great Golf that Velux Canada co-hosted and co-organized the 7th Active House Symposium that we had in Toronto last September. So they've been a real candidate with us. Unless I've missed something else, is there LEED certified projects specifically for daylight credit? So with LEED version 4, you're looking at, we haven't seen as many projects acquiring the daylighting credit because it's they're working with the IES daylighting standard, which is the international, the Illuminating Engineering Society. And they've got a standard with daylight autonomy, so it does require some additional modeling. It's not just placement of windows. So that modeling that they prescribe is a little bit more sophisticated than some of the modeling that Monica and I are currently doing, mostly Monica these days. But we are looking at how we can support projects on that. That platform closely resembles the new European daylighting standard, and as a result, we're going to have some tools in place to support that. And the latest version of the Active House standard is based off the European daylighting standard, but that same IES standard that we're using for LEED projects, pretty much will align with what Active House will be supporting. So there's a couple of different credits, but it's not that the product is certified. It's that you have to model its application to apply for the credit. And at this time, we're finding there's just a lot of credits that are easier to achieve than doing the daylighting credit. So we've seen a reduction in interest in that credit. Hope that answers that question. So we're just some thank yous. So that's fantastic. So we've got one more presentation. The first 3 presentations were really the theory and the physics and the observations around daylight and architecture and how they work together and how we can design projects. And we've kept the last presentation for product till the end. So hopefully there's been enough interest that we can plug in on the product side. But I'll also say that in June, we're going to be running a series of presentations that you can find on velux.ca. There's an architect e-learning hub there, and registration is open for those. Some of them will be similar to what we've done in collaboration with RAIC, and some of them will just have a little bit of a different twist as we play around with the content layout. So Monica, I'll say great job today. Thank you very much. And I will sign off myself here unless we see some more questions, but I can stick around for a few minutes in case there are some questions.